Hey Elvis friends, I'm Sophia.
Hi, guys, I'm Mary, and welcome to the very first episode of our new series, Elvis What Really Happened.
Today we are going to be covering chapters 1 through 4 of the book Elvis What Happened.
So, before we start discussing chapter one, we just wanted to put a little disclaimer out there. We are not trying to discredit anybody's opinions or stories or recollections of how things happened when this book was written. We are just simply adding our research and what we've learned through researching this book and just some context behind the narrative of this book to give a more accurate depiction of who Elvis truly was and who he should be remembered for. Starting with chapter one thing that me and Sophia noticed right off the bat was that this book opens so much like a fiction novel, almost like I don't know, like a fairy tale, almost like describing like a villain of a fairy tale. I feel like it's really sensationalized, and honestly I found a lot of the descriptions really unnecessary for like just the topic of the book. For some examples, they were describing the mood as somber, silent, and tense. They described the air as so crisp and clean it almost crackles. And I just feel like, I mean, like, you can write your book in whichever way that you want, but I just feel like those are kind of telltale signs that this book was written by a gossip columnist. Like, it has those kind of clues to it that this book was written by somebody who sensationalizes their work. So this chapter describes basically the situation where Elvis supposedly requested a hitman to go after Mike Stone because he was hurt and angry um, after Priscilla left him in the 70s. So we know that Elvis had a big temper and honestly, probably even a bigger ego. Who knows which one is bigger, but he said things that he didn't mean all the time. And if you really knew Elvis, you would know that he would never go through with something like this. This story is talked about so often, and we hear from multiple accounts that like he didn't mean it. He was hurt and he was angry and he was talking out of his heart and not his head. Um it even describes, like, in the book, one of the sentences describes the tears in Elvis's eyes as he tells Red that, or Sonny, I forget who it is, I think it's Red, that he tells him like it has to be done, it has to be done, or something like this. It's describing Elvis as having tears in his eyes, like obviously anguished over the situation.
We know that Elvis was taking a lot of medication for various health ailments, and the side effects could have most likely affected his moods. As we know, Elvis had a lot of mood swings, and that affected his day to day life depending on how he was feeling, how he was feeling mentally, emotionally, physically, even, because we know he went through a lot of health problems throughout his lifetime. And these moods that he went through were not the true Elvis. We know that if you know Elvis, you know that he was a totally different guy when he was not in these moods. This paints Elvis's traits like sweating and red, irritated eyes out to be traits of someone who he wasn't. He was not a monster, and that's what they depicted him to be as in this book. They make him seem like he was psycho during these moods. Examples like climbing the walls and the man on the bed is disturbed, very disturbed. Those words in itself just really show the sort of mood they're trying to set for this book and making Elvis be this image that he really wasn't, and we all know that. Um, However, Red and Sonny are both described as tough Southern boys, so they kind of paint them out to be someone almost more strong and mighty than Elvis, someone more stable than Elvis, almost in a way. They say he didn't love us, we thought he did, but he didn't. But if you really thought that, then why would you be writing all of these books about him? Why would you be still focusing your life and your image in itself on Elvis? Why did you stick around if you didn't feel like you were being treated right? Why did you do that? Like, what was your motive?
I put myself in the point of view of Red, Sonny, and Dave. They had every reason to be angry saddened, frustrated, because, Elvis was their friend. Elvis was their boss. They worked for Elvis, and to not be fired by Elvis but by his father must have been very shocking and eye-opening to them. I can't imagine, you knew Elvis for how many years? Like, Red and Sonny knew him for so many years, and Dave even knew him for a couple. So I really try to get everyone's point of view in the situation and put that into account. I'm only trying to put in perspective how saddening it is to see Elvis's name used for money, used for having this name, having this image. I'm just here for Elvis, and I'm always going to stick up for him, but always going to have this clear, open mind that he was not always in the right, but by no means did he deserve to have his privacy unleashed to the world and have it be twisted and turned and exaggerated to something that it wasn't.
Next, we are going to be focusing on Chapter 2, and this chapter mainly covered how Red met Elvis. As we all know, Red kind of stood up for Elvis during the Hume's High days, and Red says that he was a good-natured teenager, shy and sweet. Instead of leaving this as a little insight to how they met, they start going into more embarrassing details about Elvis in his early days.
Yeah, like Sophia said, it could have just been a story of how they met and came into each other's lives, but they somehow had to tie in embarrassing details about Elvis, like how bad and disgusting his acne was, like very detailed descriptions of that, how weird he seemed to everybody else for the way he dressed and the way he wore his hair. And it made it very clear that he was seen almost as a sort of like a wimp or just someone very susceptible to bullies and someone that people just couldn't help but pick on.
The next chapter we are going to be focusing on is Chapter 3, and this chapter goes into detail about this woman named Judy and her experience with Elvis one night. This chapter focuses on the mood swings also and the behavior Elvis had during this incident. To be fair, Elvis was in a mood, and she asked multiple times after being told to leave them alone and that someone else would move the car. Because she was wanting Jerry to move the car, but Elvis wanted him to keep playing, what was it, pool?
Yeah, a pool game.
And he wanted Jerry to keep playing the pool game with him because, as we know, when Elvis got really hyper fixated on a certain something, he just wanted to play that and that for hours and hours. So when he's already in a mood, he doesn't want to be bothered. And if he finds something that he's enjoying at the moment, probably don't want to bother Elvis. She then proceeds to call Elvis a name and curse at him after being persistent in denying his request in his own house as a guest. And if Elvis invites you into his home, you would think you would want to be respectful to what he's saying to you. He was offering multiple times that someone else could move the car, but she just was not having it. Elvis always acted out of impulse. We know that by all the incidents that him and the guys or girlfriends had, like argument wise, but he always felt remorse later on, even if he didn't apologize right away, or he almost did it in his own way, without using words. He would do acts that say those words in a way and almost make up the person later on. People like Ginger, Priscilla, and not just women, but men such as Jerry and other members of the mafia tell stories of when things got out of control and things were said that were not meant. Elvis always in some way was able to show that he was sorry. From an example from Jerry Schilling's book, Me and a Guy Named Elvis, he proceeds to say, so if you want to follow along with what page I'm reading from, this is on 156 through 159. A little brief summary of what was going on was Elvis was in a mood, and he and Jerry got into an argument about his girlfriend at the time. They got into a physical fight, and Jerry ended up being so mad that he got up and walked out on Elvis. He went back to the house he was living in with Elvis and started packing up his things. Then Jerry says, When I finally got back to the house, I stewed around for a while, going over the fight with Elvis. Every time I ran through it, my head, I ended up just as angry, but more and more sadness was creeping in, too. I could find another job somewhere, but maybe I'd just lost my best friend. I started packing and thinking about how I'd explain the move to Sandy. I'd gotten the suitcase about half full when I realized Elvis was at the door. I stopped what I was doing. There was a very awkward moment, with both of us trying to not really look at the other, and neither one knowing what to say. But just being that close and that quiet, I felt some things shift a little. Had he been a jerk? Yes. Had I overreacted? Probably. We both had nasty tempers. But now we were both cooled down. The guy standing at the door was the guy I'd been enraged at all day. But now that he was right there, I had no desire to pick up where we'd left off, and I could tell from his downcast gaze and uneasy stance that he wasn't in any kind of fighting mood. We both could feel that the emotions in this room were a lot different from those left behind in the Paramount dressing room. We just weren't sure what to do. Elvis was never much of a hugger. We guys were much more likely to get hit than hugged by him. But without a word, he came across the room, put his arms up, and we joined for a quick, easy embrace. In a flash, I quickly realized that I really didn't want to go anywhere. We were silent. I didn't feel like rehashing the fight or sorting it out. And I know he didn't either. I just quietly started reaching into the suitcase and putting my clothes back in the drawers of my dresser. And quietly and carefully, Elvis began to help, gently moving a few things from suitcase to drawer. This was the guy who didn't pick up his own clothes. To have him put away a pair of my socks meant a lot. That in itself shows that Elvis didn't always use words to apologize for certain situations or happenings that happened with the people close to him. He just wasn't that kind of guy. He had a very big ego, as we said before, and he did these little things to kind of show and put in agreement that he was sorry.
We'll never really know if Elvis did ever apologize for that situation because the guys never really did put that into detail. But to know kind of what Elvis usually did to apologize is good to keep in mind.
All right, so the last chapter we'll be discussing today is chapter 4, and this chapter introduces Dave Hebler into the story. So one of the things that stood out to me during this chapter, it was said that Elvis didn't actually put any effort into karate, but if he did, he could have been decent at it. I have multiple issues with this because number one, Elvis stuck with karate from the late 50s in the army until literally the end of his life. His stage moves, he was going to make a whole karate documentary, footage of him during his, the 60s, during the 70s. They show that he was into it. I mean, his whole brand on stage was karate. Like, he loved karate. And we also know that Elvis became obsessed with things in waves, like the slot cars at Graceland, or the horses, or living at Circle G and being kind of like a ranchman. If he wasn't into karate, he would have dropped that too. He wouldn't have stuck with it all of his life. If he didn't love it, or if he wasn't passionate about it, he would have dropped it. The TCB oath, like, come on, if you read that, you know how important karate was to Elvis. So to say that he wasn't good or that he didn't try just based on your opinion of how he performed, I just don't agree that that is fair. It also talked about how Elvis was wobbly, sweaty, had, again, the red irritated eyes, and immediately blames those symptoms on drugs. However, what we know now in 2022 is that Elvis's bodily systems were literally failing. His heart, his liver, his kidneys, his lungs, etc. They were all diseased. He had disease and disorder in 9 of the 11 bodily systems, and 5 of them were present since birth. So he was sick. I can't even imagine how he honestly lived to be 42. Like, he was very sick. So sweating can be, but should not immediately be pinned as a symptom of drug use. Lots of men sweat profusely, even women do, while doing strenuous physical activity. And also, doing strenuous activity while ill could make you clammy and sweaty. As far as the irritated eyes, we know now that Elvis had hypersensitivity to light, and he was suffering from a severe case of glaucoma, and he was very close to going blind in a few instances. There's even pictures of Elvis on stage during his concert wearing sunglasses, because most likely because the light was bothering him so much, and he didn't want his fans to see his eyes looking like they were irritated and not attractive or whatever. um, so these men couldn't have known that this was what was really aiding the cause of these physical symptoms in Elvis. But things that we know in 2022 aren't the things that they could have known in 1977. Elvis didn't even know what was wrong with him. But that's a prime example of why we cannot take these kinds of accounts as gospel, because they aren't credible. It doesn't matter that these guys spent a bunch of time with Elvis, whether they say they spent every waking minute with Elvis or was around Elvis a lot, worked for Elvis. They still couldn't have known these things simply because the information wasn't available in the 50s. Medical information that is so crucial to understanding Elvis's behavior, Elvis's mood, Elvis's physical appearance, everything. It wasn't available in the 70s, that medical information. So to wrap this up, I think that this is a huge goal of mine and Sophia's with this series, is to start breaking things down, putting things in perspective, adding context, and start asking the why. Why was Elvis acting the way he was? Why did he have really bad mood swings? Why was he acting out? Why, the most important question, why did he feel the need to take medication? Why did he feel like he could not go on without it? Why, every time he was asked, did he say, I know what I'm doing. I need this. I need this to keep going. Like, I know what I'm doing for my body. And I think that's the most important thing that we're trying to push out of reading this book. It's not to come and attack everybody who wrote it or to place blame on people. It's not anything like that, but it's just for Elvis, because people weren't doing this stuff back then. They couldn't have been doing this stuff back then because they couldn't look at it in our place and say, well, we know this now, so that explains why Elvis could have been doing this. And honestly, I think me and Sophia both agree that Elvis deserves that. He deserves this book to be retold. He deserves these stories to be put into perspective. And it's fair to him. It's fair to have this book be debunked for Elvis, because we know that this book is not Elvis. It's not, he wasn't a monster.
Period. He deserves to have questions answered at the end of the day, and that's what we're here to do. No matter what people's opinions are, what people think, what people comment, we are here to spread the truth that we somewhat know, what we can get an insight of, because we weren't there. We weren't in Elvis's body. We weren't him. So to be here, to be able to put together the pieces of the puzzle that we can, is really important to us, and this is why we came up with this idea for Elvis What Really Happened.
If you liked this first episode and you would like to hear Sophia and I debunk more chapters of this book, make sure to tune in to my YouTube channel, Mary Patricia, to hear us talk about and discuss chapters 5 through 8.
Feel free to comment down below what you think about these first 4 chapters, and if you are excited to see more of this series as much as we are. See you guys next time.
Bye, everyone.